Welcome everybody. Welcome to episode 37 of the Tom, Stu and You podcast. Now, in today's topic, I just want to throw out a big spoiler alert here because we will be discussing David Attenborough's latest Netflix documentary, A Life on Our Planet. So if you haven't seen it, go and check it out first, and then do come back to hear what we've got to say about our review of it, basically, and some of the thoughts that we've had after watching it. Stu, how have we been doing, my man? You all right?
I've been good. Yeah, real good. This documentary has created some questions for us, hasn't it? Like I
It
have
definitely has.
2 whole pages of notes written down here with. Yeah, that was it's definitely a refreshing new take on a nature documentary by Netflix, which has been
It
good
is.
because we haven't talked the best about some of Netflix's other documentaries, and I'm mainly thinking about the Michael Moore documentary that we had a very heated
Yeah,
discussion about in a
we did
previous
indeed.
episode.
Yeah, that was the one that was released on YouTube, wasn't it? And both dealing with like similar things, similar themes. You know, climate breakdown being the most poignant one. But they come at it from like slightly different angles. I felt. With this one, there was more in terms of solutions put forward, which I thought was great. It could have been a bit longer, I think, and a bit more comprehensive in that regard. I don't know what you felt about it, because it sort of detailed, you know, what's going on, where we're at, kind of thing, for the most part. And then I kind of feel like the last, I don't know, half an hour or something was like where the solutions were crammed in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get more into the criticisms and perhaps some of the reasons why they did make that creative choice. But I think a lot of it just boils down to not wanting to do too much and become across as too preachy, I guess. That, you know, they wanted to keep it to a relatively decent amount of time. An hour and a half for a documentary is pretty standard. You know, once you start dragging on past that 2 hour mark, 2.5 hour mark, you start
People switch
questioning,
off.
should it be an episode, like an episodic show? And then also, how do you maintain a consistent style and story across different episodes when you're really touching on the same point of view? But yeah, this is definitely not a usual David Attenborough documentary, and I completely agree that perhaps it could have been a bit harder hitting in some of the solutions they put forward. I do have to take my hat off to Mr. Attenborough, as it was, Sir David Attenborough, as it was. You know, this is
a
very
national
much
treasure.
a national treasure. This is very much him, you know, putting his reputation somewhat on the line. You know, less so now that the environmental movement is making strides around the world, but even so, for someone with such a large and well-respected career, to come out and say that we need to be doing better, definitely puts his neck on the line a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was important for him to do.
Absolutely.
You know, I say national treasure, I should probably say international treasure, because you know, he's the wealth of experience that man has, the career he's had. I mean, he'd be the perfect, you know, dinner guest, wouldn't he? I'm sure he'd be on everyone's list to have around for dinner, for sure. So he is probably one of the, if not the best placed people to comment on, you know, the state of the decline of nature that we've seen over his lifetime, and you know what solutions that are available from the science that he's investigated. So he's probably best placed to, you know, talk about all that kind of stuff. 94 years old he is, and still going strong, eh?
It's unbelievable. The way he speaks, his cadence, his rhythm, his power of storytelling. You know, the amount of emotion that he can portray, especially in some of those scenes where he does pause for effect. Especially after saying something, you know, quite poignant. It's incredible to see the hold he has on his consciousness, and you know, the weight of responsibility he feels for the role he plays in the environmental movement. It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I respected the man as much as I thought I could, but you know, this documentary has just taken it up another notch.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because he could quite easily just retire and, you know, live happily, quietly. But you know, I think he says himself, doesn't he, in the documentary or something similar, that he couldn't, you know, bear witness to what was going on and not say something, which I think is the right thing to do. In some of the ways that he was talking in the documentary, with it obviously being his witness statement, and some of the moments of interview that he has in there are quite poignant, as you say, quite moving. You can tell that he's moved by what he's talking about and what he's seen. It kind of felt that there was a sense of finality about it to me, like it might be the last thing that he does, which would be crazy. He is 94. Seems to be going strong, but it did seem that there was a kind of air of this might be the most important thing that I have to say, really.
Yeah, and I mean, if I get to the end of my life and that's the last piece of material I produce, and it has the effect that hopefully this documentary will have, then I know I would be incredibly proud of the work that I'd done, and I think he would feel the same way. But I think it comes down to his values. He holds these values so dear to his heart, and he truly does believe in them. And he, as he says, like there's just no way he could have been okay with himself if he had just faded into the background and not taken a stand for something he so truly believes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talking about the documentary more in general, the way it's filmed is just stunning. As with all these, BBC, Netflix type things that have been going on, like Our Planet and Blue Planet and all that kind of thing. Just amazing the videography that goes on.
Oh, especially coming from both of us who do dip our toes into the nature filming realm. Some of the shots are still unbelievable. Just the hummingbird scene in particular, where the sun's setting behind and the hummingbird is silhouetted. Like, how would you even know that is going to? So while there's no fancy, state-of-the-art technology, I think, used in this documentary above and beyond, especially Our Planet and some of the other documentaries that he's been involved with, I think it does just truly show there is a power in visual storytelling.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what I got from it as well.
And the camera crews are just getting better and better at that ability and that skill as the years go on. So truly, absolutely. It is just a beautiful documentary to watch on its own, let alone the powerful message that it does share with you as well.
Yeah, and I think you and I both agree and are advocates of the power of visual storytelling, photography, videography, all these kind of things. Because some of the power of those images, like the orangutans climbing up that only tree that's left in an area that's getting deforested for palm oil, just truly powerful stuff. But also showing and advocating the beauty of things that we're trying to protect in protecting biodiversity and getting rid of these monocultures that we don't need.
Yeah, I think it all comes back down to the detachment, I guess, humanity now has from the natural world compared to our previous way of living, I guess, pre-industrialization. And he's focused so much on that through all of his documentaries, and visual storytelling is a huge part of that. It's it's creating personality. It's intending to form a connection between the viewer and the animals that you're watching, and it's just showcasing just how beautiful, just how special nature is, and the intent that after watching such a documentary, you do come out of it with a sense of, you personally have a role to play in the future protection of our environment and our planet as a whole. And it's as Greta says, a lot of her inspiration, I guess, for the fight against climate change is against climate change. It was these documentaries and just seeing the beauty of our nature. It makes you want to protect it. So the fact that this documentary as well was filmed beautifully, I didn't expect anything less. And there's a reason why it's gotten scores of 9.1 on IMDb and 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's definitely been a well-received documentary, and I think a large part of that comes down to the structure that it's taken in terms of a documentary. It's set out both as sort of a narrative style of David Attenborough's life. It sets him up as an expert, as it were, by showcasing the fact that for his entire life he has been in and amongst nature, witnessing these beautiful exhibits of Mother Nature and our Earth firsthand, and so that even within his lifestyle, as long as it has been 94 years, there's still been such a significant shift that's so clear to him.
Yeah, definitely. It almost does seem like his entire life was like leading up to this point, didn't it? Sort of thing. Like with everything that he's seen and experienced, things that he wasn't even realizing when he was in the thick of it. Like when he went to the mountain gorillas, he didn't realize at the time that, you know, their home was getting destroyed at the time, basically.
Yeah.
Do you think that this documentary has the power to, you know, how you were saying, like when you watch it, you feel like you've got a part to play personally in how you live on a daily basis. Do you think that it is going to be a documentary that inspires people to actually act, or, you know, what do you think is going to happen?
I mean, that's a big question, isn't it? You know, as much as we applaud the power of visual storytelling, um, we do now live in a society where it doesn't matter how big, beautiful, and amazing the production is, it can quickly fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting to note that, you know, I've just watched a documentary recently, so it's been out for about a week at the time of this recording, and I did find it interesting that when it first came out, it was very much like the first thing recommended to me, the first thing top #1 in Canada. It was trending now. It was
Yeah.
it was listed multiple times on the front page of Netflix when you opened up the mobile phone app or the computer, the desktop browser app. And yet a week later, it's not in the top 10 anymore. It's not trending
Yeah.
now. And TV shows like Friends or, you know, movies that have been out for 5, 6 years now are currently trending and top Canada, you know. So
That's interesting.
I did think it was interesting that something more light-hearted and, you know, a bit more comedic, like a lot of the shows,
Yeah.
you know, Good Place, Schitt's Creek, Friends, you know, they're all very much, you know, top 1 to 5 and have been for months and months. Every time I open up Netflix, it's one of those shows being pushed towards me.
Yeah. Do you reckon this was a documentary where after you watched it, it was like, right, I need to watch Friends or Schitt's Creek now to just
Just to make
before I go
yourself
to
feel better.
bed? Yeah, to make
I mean,
yourself feel
I
better.
think
Yeah.
a lot of people probably did have that. You know, it's not as much of a doom and gloom sort of documentary as something like Cowspiracy or even Michael Moore's documentary or Leonardo DiCaprio's or Al Gore's documentaries. So, you know, even though it has been filmed beautifully and it's not quite as doom and gloom, you know, he does come up with some optimism towards the end. I think for a lot of people, and I don't think it's an intentional algorithm change within Netflix to, you know, make sure it's not promoted. It's one of their originals, so I would have thought if anything it'd be the opposite. And it does appear in the
Yeah.
Netflix original a row when you click on see more or whatever, so it'll still be promoted to some extent, but I think it just shows a wider viewpoint, no, a wider behavior in society that, you know, we don't want to be constantly reminded about the negative things happening in life, and we would rather live
Bury
in
our
this
head in
little
the sand
bubble.
for a bit.
Yeah, a little bubble of positivity,
Yeah.
I guess, and it makes sense. You know, there's articles after articles written about climate anxiety, especially in the younger generations, affecting their mental health, and it's a
Sure.
fair concern to be having. And I guess it's a
Definitely.
fine line between not wanting to unnecessarily create anxiety in our children, while also still requiring enough being produced to inform us about the need for action,
hmm
and you know, creating that sense of urgency, which is so obviously needed at this
Yeah,
time.
definitely. Did you feel like, just on a personal level, did you feel like the documentary sort of made you feel good or give credibility to the way that you personally lead your life?
Yeah, I think it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, at certain points, I did find myself, you know, championing Attenborough within my own head as I was watching it, just being like, yes, like more people need to be doing this. Um, and you know, there were moments where I was like, I'm glad that I'm doing this. I'm glad that I'm doing my part.
hmm
You know, I wish it touched on a few other things. You know, we'll get into a bit more in detail shortly.
Yeah.
And there was a lot that I was like, why does this need to be repeated again and again? But I think it's a false assumption that we make regularly, and um, you know, it's fair enough. It's just something that humans do because we are humans, part of our
hmm
psychology, and that we falsely assume that everyone else is consuming the same information as we are. You know, they're living lives very similar to ourselves, and therefore they should have the same beliefs and knowledge and experience. And they should be making the same decisions that we are. But for a lot of people, they aren't, and hopefully this documentary reaches those people um, that were maybe on the fence or were maybe just beginning their journey, and it's either the final push that people need to
Yeah.
to jump onto the right path for the rest of their lives, or for those people just starting out on that journey, perhaps this is the that bit of encouragement that they need to reinforce the fact that they are making the right decisions. And I think even though I've been on this journey now for a couple of years, it's always nice to get encouragement, to know
Yeah.
that the way I live my life is recommended by someone as respected as David Attenborough. It is backed up by science, and hopefully it does result in the greater change we need as a society, and therefore protecting humanity as a species. Now,
Yeah.
that could be all high and mighty of me, and that's not the intention at all. But I think the
Well, you
documentary
just
does.
you just said it's backed up by the science, right? So you
Yeah, I
know what
mean,
you do is based on what you read, stuff like this documentary, science, facts, figures. It's not just plucked out of thin air, so to speak.
no. But also, I can respect that others make different decisions to myself, and we need to
Oh yeah, of
find a
course.
way of coming to a general consensus and improving the lives of others. And it is a long process. Humans don't like change. We don't like complexity, and so breaking things down, which I think this documentary did quite good. It structured things out in a way that sort of set up his credibility in the first half.
Yeah.
Saying, this is why I have the opinions I have. These are the results we're seeing. This is what the science is saying. And then it steps into the next realm of, these are some of the scientific predictions. If we don't change, if we continue business as usual, this is likely to happen. And then to stop that, what are some of the solutions that are being suggested? And, for environmentalists, I'm sure we didn't learn anything new from this documentary. But for a lot of people in the general public that don't have any sort of specific interest in environmentalism, perhaps there were things that they learnt. And, the greater amount of information that we can possibly provide to someone and stepping them through it at a pace that, is respectful of their perhaps lack of desire to change significantly, and respect for their self-identity and image that they've built up over their life.
Yeah.
I think this documentary could do wonders for stepping them through each
Yeah.
of the stages that we all want to be going through on a personal level, so that collectively as a society we can then also make the same changes.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it's a good point. Like in terms of like my own journey or whatever, I found it pretty easy to go like on a full vegan diet after about a month, really, from transitioning. But that doesn't mean that's what I advocate to everyone. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it's like if people just have days where they're like trying out vegan dishes and stuff like that, I'm always encouraging of that. But I respect their decisions and things like that. So it's not about demanding that people change, just out of nothing. It's based on the facts. It's supporting like a slow, gradual process if that's what people need to do. Um, you know, not eating meat, a couple of days a week is better than eating meat every day of the week, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's those small steps that we should be supportive of. What I thought was the key message from the documentary for me was that this whole thing with climate breakdown, it's not about saving the planet, really. It's about saving humanity, really, which I thought was really, really powerful message, and maybe one that's been kind of lost a little bit, because I think people do think it is about saving the world as we know it, but it's actually about saving ourselves, which I think is an important distinction to make.
Yeah, I really liked his quote. Our planet run by humankind for humankind, and there is
Mm,
little left for the rest of the living world.
yeah.
And that's comes after the fact that he mentions that a third of the weight biomass of animals on Earth are humans.
Yeah.
Sixty
Some of the
percent,
statistics are crazy.
60% animals raised for food consumption by humans, and then only 4% remains for the rest of the animals, from mice to whales, for example.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable to
And
think of.
it blows my mind, I guess, that despite statistics like that, we can't seem to see, I guess, as a collective,
Hmm.
that the planet doesn't give a shit about us. Like,
Mm,
obviously those animals do. The 4% of animals that we're affecting, the 6% of animals that we are, you know, putting through quite terrible living conditions for us,
mm,
they obviously have a direct result from our behavior. But in terms of the Earth's planets, like, it'll be fine. And I really, really, really loved the visual metaphor of using Chernobyl as a basis at the start and the end of this documentary. And, he goes on to say that, this was a direct result of human mistakes and, short-sightedness by humanity. And as you can see, by the end of the documentary, nature's retaken over. It's a sanctuary for wild animals again. The trees are growing in amongst buildings, vines are growing up the concrete paths. Like, nature itself will recover. It won't look the same as it does now, and 90% of the animals could possibly go extinct, but humans are going to be part of that 90% if we don't change the way that we live. And maybe we won't go fully extinct, but we're not going to be the same species as we think of ourselves now. And as you say, I think it's definitely been lost in the environmental movement. And I think that's because we keep getting muddied in our arguments, and critics in particular pick up on the semantics of us saying, save the planet. Save the planet is a great marketing catchphrase.
It's a great slogan.
It's a great slogan if you just want something short, simple, summarizes roughly what we're trying to do. But when there's a whole range of critics picking on the fact that we're saying save the planet, and all of those arguments about the climate has changed significantly before, we've been through ice ages and we've been through warm periods in the past, that is a great rebuttal to save the planet if what you believe is that from our actions Earth itself will disappear or something. But when you actually take a step back and you think about, we're not talking about saving the planet, we're talking about saving humans' planet and the way we live on that planet, then all of a sudden those arguments become false and they become irrelevant, because yes, the planet has gone through these amazing ups and downs in our climate in the past. But do you know who didn't exist back then? Humans. And do you know who won't exist again if we continue on this path? Humans.
Yeah. And I think that's something that people can really latch onto, I think, because, and maybe that's what's been missing, because one of the main reasons why I changed my diet and tried to reduce my carbon footprint as much as possible was because obviously my niece and nephew came along. And so when Attenborough has that bit in the documentary where he was like, where he goes through the horrifying predictions, for the 2030s, 40s, 50s. He says, if I was born today, we would go through this, which I'm sure we'll come on to soon. But some of those predictions are pretty terrifying. They're pretty stark. And so, I wanted to, I kind of did it for them, with them in mind, their future, the future of the planet. I obviously care about animals and other sentient creatures and things like that. But they are one of the main reasons, so that I can have a clear conscience in looking at them and saying, I try to do my bit on an individual level, you know what I mean? So I can look them in the face and say that. But those predictions, if you were born today, the predictions for the 2030s, 40s, 50s, 2080s, and the 2100s are quite horrifying.
They are, and
yeah,
I think critics will have a field day, and are probably already having a field day. They are having a field day. I spent much of the morning going down the rabbit hole of YouTube criticism videos and comment sections, which is always a wonderful time to be.
It's always an eye opener.
I don't know why I find it so fun, because I get so angry and exhausted at the end. Not that I am responding to them all. I think that's it's not constructive to have arguments on the internet when you're just calling each other names, which is mostly what those comment sections are. But what gets me so riled up, I guess, and so critics in the past, and it's been a criticism of the environmental movement in general, what happened to the ozone layer, what happened to global warming, now it's a climate change, now it's global emergency, all of these things are falsely assumed to be individual separate things, and just because scientists have been wrong in the past, they're probably wrong now, is a false dichotomy of where we are looking for something simplistic in something that is obviously very complex. And some of the predictions that are mentioned in this documentary, especially 2030s, they're only 10 years away. Like it's a pretty severe result, and maybe that is quite a pessimistic view of what might happen in the 30s.
Yeah,
But
maybe it is a worst case scenario, but
maybe it is.
that is a worst case scenario. It's horrible. So
It is.
what it is the deforestation of the Amazon continues. So then not enough moisture can be produced. It turns into a dry savanna, and it affects global water cycles.
Yeah,
that's in the 2030s, which is around the corner in terms of human history.
Yeah, and maybe that happens in the 50s instead of the 30s. But the key takeaway, I think, and this is what gets me so riled up, and I even felt it in this documentary because, like, while I believe in those scientific predictions, my mind was already jumping to the criticism that was surely to follow. And everything in life is a cost-benefit analysis, right? And as far as I can see it, the benefit of us continuing business as usual does in no way even remotely compare to the possible risk of if we are wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So
if
I
we're
totally
wrong
agree
and
with that.
everything goes and everything's if we're wrong and everything is fine in the 2030s, like, kudos to us. But if the scientific predictions come right, and we were basically saying that with the coronavirus, right? It's like, this was something mentioned years and years and years ago, saying that, like, at some point a global pandemic is going to happen. And basically all of our world leaders across the world were like, yeah, but what's if you're wrong? And we've just put in all of this stuff for nothing, like, we've done
There's
all
no
of this extra
preparation
work
anywhere.
and we spent all this money, doing something that might not happen. We've just seen the results of a lack of preparation. And Chernobyl as a visual metaphor at the start, like, that shows a lack of preparation. That shows what happens when humans blindly stumble into something thinking that nothing's going to go wrong. Like, I just find it so hard to believe that people can value their own ego, their own, self-identity, their, money, capitalism. Don't even, like, we'll get onto capitalism in a second. But,
you brought it up.
I know. I didn't think I'd bring it up first. I rarely bring it up first. That's normally your go-to. But, like, what happens if we're right and we are fucked? Because all of these people would prefer to just make a quick buck now. And that's basically what's happening with businesses, despite the fact that we've been raising this alarm for 40 years. And I don't see why this isn't more important to a lot more people. And I understand it's human nature, because humans aren't long-term thinking beings. We weren't designed to be. Evolution didn't help us think long-term. We always thought about the short-term hunter-gatherer mindset. We were just looking for the next meal, because there's no point thinking about what might happen in 6 months' time when you can't even feed yourself tomorrow. And, the agricultural revolution and now the industrial revolution has changed that slightly, and now we are thinking, in the middle term, but we still haven't ever gone over that evolutionary basis of thinking short-term. It's just the relative timescale has now changed. And, thinking longer term in the hundreds, 200 years, we still value ourselves more than we value the next generation or the next generation about. And it doesn't matter what big ticket item we discuss, there's always someone that just says, well, back in my day, or can't you just see how much better life has gotten in the last 50 years? And you have to take a step back and say that, like, yes, wow, things have gotten better in the last 50 years. But why can't we always be trying for more? Like, why shouldn't we be looking forward? Like, yes, while the past has been better for the next 50 years, we can't say the same with certainty that the next 50 years are going to be better for us than the next generation below us. And that's in pretty much any big issue that is currently facing the world right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even in terms of, like, what you said earlier about business, just not doing anything, some of them have actually proactively tried to hide climate breakdown, like with propaganda and things like that. So that's one thing. In terms of, like, life being better than it was in the past or whatever, I'm not so sure that it is, if you compare it to, say, like the 1960s or something, but prior to the neoliberal period, you could maybe say it was better, but we've had, like, decades of wage stagnation and the working class getting pummeled while productivity goes up, while wages have, remained, or basically gone down in real terms. That's capitalism. But yeah, so you're totally right. There's loads of issues there with capitalism that I think we'll come on to in a bit. One of the best things one of the really interesting things that I thought was brought up by David Attenborough in the documentary was the comparison of meat eaters. You know, when he said that meat eaters are rare in nature because they require a lot, and so you can't have a population of billions of meat eaters because it's unsustainable. And I think that just goes to show, you know, that touches on population as well. But in terms of our diet, it does show that he says, I would obviously advocate for a vegan one where possible. It's obviously potentially not for everyone, but you know, where possible, I found it pretty easy. And I think you and I want to start to put together like a resource thing to try and help people, you know, YouTube videos, you know, try these recipes and all that kind of stuff. But you know, we can't keep going on the path of everyone being meat eaters, or you know, a huge majority of the population being meat eaters across the world, because it's just completely unsustainable. So that you know, that's something that you know I've advocated for 4 years now, and it's just great to see someone like David Attenborough. I think he could have gone a bit further with the vegan thing. I do, but it's just even great that he's just even mentioning plant-based. You know, going predominantly plant-based. Yeah, so just super important. Population growth. Again, this is something that we can link into capitalism and things like that, because one of the greatest ways to slow that down is not to go against any like humanist views or anything like that. So it's to, you know, educate people and bring people out of poverty. So it's the way to reduce the population is to actually make life better for people. And I think that is a message that's often been lost as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key takeaway in general from the solutions provided is that business as usual cannot continue. And while that's been a message that we feel like, well, the environmental movement has been trying to hammer home for decades, it's good to see someone as prolific as David Attenborough finally stepping up and saying the same thing too, lending his voice and support to the movement, and yeah, I think humans really do not like complexity, which I've said many times this episode already. And you know, we've created this dichotomy assumption in that, you know, there's no way that by bringing like that everyone, the standard of living can be improved for everyone without there also being an increase in consumption. For some reason, we've linked consumption and productivity, you know, the growth, the improvement of countries around the world. You know, we've linked them all together, and that's like if one goes up, then the others have to go up. But I think what we're seeing now is that with efficiency, with scale of economics, or economies of scale, I mean, and with, you know, increased investment in renewable exhausters, for example, you know, like a small input can have a much greater output than it used to in the past. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree that David Attenborough probably could have been a bit more harder hitting, I guess, with some of the solutions he mentioned. So just to go over them very quickly for people, you know, we talked about rewilding our world, you know, which is
Big
something
fans of that.
we've discussed briefly. You know, the book Feral by George Monbiot is a must-read for everyone. He talks a lot about rewilding our world. He also mentioned improving the standard of living, you know, for especially third world countries, and that's talking about you know, improving their economy, their transport systems, their energy systems, investing in education specifically for girls. He talked a lot about the population issue, and one of the biggest ways to slow down population growth is actually the investment of education in women, because as we know, living in first world countries, the more someone is invested in their career, the less likely they are to have children earlier. And ideally, we want to start limiting the size of families. But he also talks briefly about complete divestment from fossil fuels and reinvesting in renewables, which obviously we're big fans of.
Absolutely.
As you say, the plant-based diet. He also doesn't mention that everyone has to go vegan, and we have spoken briefly about that as well. Like, we don't expect people to just jump ship and go straight to vegan. And I think that's been, you know, one of the problems in the past, especially of the vegan movement in particular, but in general, this can be applied to the environmental movement as a whole, in that it has a brand image in which, you know, the hippie with dreadlocks and smokes weed with, you know, the peace symbol tattoo is supposedly representative of who everyone should be as the ideal human, and that's not true at all. Like, we need to start getting better at, you know, expanding that conversation and that identity piece to include people that, just do small steps in their lives. So like, we don't expect you to be vegan 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Just small incremental changes rather than no change at all. And over time, you'll actually see that those incremental changes will build up to a big change. And
Yeah.
We don't want to get rid of meat from our diet in total. That's just a decision we've made ourselves personally. But we know that it isn't going to work for everyone, and we don't expect it to work for everyone. But if you can start dropping down that consumption of meat to only a couple of times a week, you'll start to see benefits, in your health. You'll start to realize that vegan food can taste delicious. Like, this isn't the 1970s anymore. You don't just have to eat grass.
Yeah. No, I think it's good points that you're making there. It's I feel like if people incrementally change and start to educate themselves about what a meat or a carnivore diet does to the planet, how unsustainable it is for humans to follow that. For example, just one statistic: it takes 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. You and I have stood on Athabasca Glacier and seen the glacial retreat. It is quite something to behold if you ever get a chance to go to any of the world's glaciers that I'm sure are in retreat. They're a source of fresh water, and so there are myriad problems that have come out of losing the ice. Basically, the planet's losing its ice, as David Attenborough says during the documentary. Your diet is one of the top ways, if not the top way, to mitigate that problem. One thing that I wish that Attenborough had spoke more about, he speaks a lot about palm oil, and don't get me wrong, palm oil is a huge problem, but I don't think it is as huge as the deforestation that takes place for farmland, to make room for more cattle, to make room for more soy to feed cattle, not even to feed humans. I saw this amazing thing on social media earlier, where it was like, how is it that we managed to feed 60 billion farm animals but not 7.8 billion people? And that's a question that I'd like people to consider, because that is just crazy when you actually think about it. In the UK, we've got a government who won't extend the free school meals over the winter, but we can somehow, manage to feed farm animals so that we can, as Attenborough says, it's a planet run by humans, for our own consumption. It's just, when you actually start to think about these things, big picture, and connect the dots, it really is quite remarkable. Personally, I am an advocate of a vegan diet. I think it's good for your conscience. I think you don't have to go cold turkey like I did, basically. You don't have to just stop overnight, which is what I did. I found it easy. Maybe for a month it was hard, but I don't remember that at all now, and I actually don't miss meat at all. And I do think it is good to change. As he says, the planet physically, like, we can't take that many. We can't take billions of meat eaters, basically. And meat eaters are rare in nature. And I just think that industrial farming, the scale of industrial farming that we have now, is something that future historians, should we get to that point, will look back on and be like, did that actually happen? You know what I mean? It's like, did we actually treat animals that way? Because I just think it's the way that the human consciousness grows, as we evolve. There are so many, rights that people have now that we didn't have in the past, traditions that have gone by the wayside because they're not socially acceptable anymore. I just think that that's the way that we'll view how we treat animals certainly in industrial meat and milk production and things like that in the future. So yeah, I think the documentary is great, and it does offer a lot of solutions. Renewables, as we talked about with the the Michael Moore documentary. We're big advocates of renewables, and it's good to see that there is an impetus behind it for getting there. But it's also important to have the criticisms that were in the Michael Moore documentary. Sometimes the people who are with you are also your worst critics at times, if you know what I mean. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if people are interested more in our journey to veganism, we actually did a whole episode number 9, called "Big Ol' Vegans,"
Big old
that
vegans.
you can learn more. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
but yeah, I think to start on the criticisms of the documentary, I guess, and the wider
Hmm.
discussion on environmental movements, although we've touched on it briefly throughout the last 40 minutes as it is. Um, I did find it interesting that there was no mention of nuclear energy once again, and I think that comes down
Mm.
to my much earlier point that, as with anything, but particularly a documentary such as this, there is a fine line between being too preachy and scaring off those that should be reached, and also being too overly optimistic and therefore not facilitating the sense of urgency that change is actually needed. And I think something like nuclear has become so political in the last couple of decades that
Yeah.
I I don't blame David Attenborough and the team for just ignoring it and not mentioning it once at all. Um,
Mm. I mean,
but
they were at Chernobyl as well.
they were at Chernobyl as well. But
They
I
were at
do
Chernobyl.
still wish they had of taken the bigger risk, um,
Hmm.
by mentioning it, just to bring it back, I think, into the public discourse. I think we Tom and I want to do a whole episode on nuclear energy and discuss the stereotypes, the fear, and perhaps some of the changes that have been made to nuclear
Hmm.
energy throughout the last couple of decades since, particularly the Chernobyl disaster. So
Hmm.
look forward to that in one of our future episodes.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and I did have a big question after watching this documentary of, was it too overly optimistic?
Mm.
And I don't have the answer for that. I think that's something that we'll need to wait and see for. Will it actually create any of the change that is required? Will it be something that people remember in a few months' time, in a few years' time? Will we look
Hmm.
back and see this documentary as something that actually made a change? As I imagine we'll look back and see, the Greta speech where she said we are still stealing our future, as something. I don't know if it's at the same sort of caliber of um, memorability, but I definitely do think that it is a documentary people don't want to be watching in 2020 with everything happening this year, but I definitely think it is something that we all should be watching in 2020.
Yeah, for
Actually, I
sure.
think it's a documentary we should have been watching in 2000, but I will take 2020.
Yeah, yeah. It's better, before it's too late than never, shall we say? Um, yeah. So I've said, like, one of my criticisms was that he kind of didn't go on about the veganism thing or the farming thing enough for me, which he could have, because there's a lot of science on that,
Mm-hmm.
that we can link in the description. Um, but another thing was that I think that he could have mentioned systemic things like capitalism. I do think it is important to connect the dots here. Um, Capitalism is a system that's based on, exponential growth year on year on a planet of finite resources. How does that even work? It doesn't. Um, it's it, it's just crazy that people think that that's how it can be. I mean, we've talked about capitalism and how, you know, in the systems that we have, especially in the Western world, where you have an emphasis on private property, on the profit motive, on short-term gains, on because profit is the be-all and end-all, and because it is the main duty of directors and things like that to shareholders, we don't take account of, like, externalities and all these kind of things. The pollution that some of these companies produce, especially oil companies. Um, we don't look at the fact that the cost of that pollution is often put onto the taxpayer as well. So it costs people money, in order for these things to get cleaned up. Um, Going back to the experience that I had in Canada whilst, photographing the Indigenous Solutions to Environmental Problems conference. When you're a lawyer who sticks up for Indigenous people who've been, poisoned by multinational corporations, you get vilified. And I'm talking there about Stephen Donziger, who is a lawyer who represented Indigenous people from Venezuela, and he got vilified. There was a demonized Donziger campaign by Chevron, who are a big, Canadian oil company, and he got, disbarred, and he's under house arrest and things like that. And just in the system, money speaks, because Chevron were able to get the case heard by a judge who is, sympathetic to corporate interests. And so there's a systemic problem here where we need to be talking about, is the system of capitalism detrimental to the environment? We just talked about industrial meat production as well. That happens because it's profitable. We look at, we're in the middle of a pandemic at the minute. It comes from our relationship with nature, or our lack of a relationship with nature and respect of nature. Whether you're talking about coronavirus now, expanding farmland and things like that into wild territories where you come into contact with these pathogens from animals, or whether it's from like H1N1 back in 2009 or wherever it was, from pig farms in America. Our relationship with nature is fundamentally broken, and one of the main reasons for that is the capitalist structure, because you take the resources it's extractive capitalism. Everything's extractive. You're taking resources, not taking account of externalities, cutting corners, so putting more pollution into the environment and things like that, as Volkswagen did when they cheated the tests with their vehicles. It's my personal opinion that we need to go beyond capitalism in order to save the planet. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's three big pieces to that, I guess. And this might be the most important thing that I say today. It certainly will be the most important thing outside this episode that I'll probably talk about today. First bit is, and David has a quote from this in the documentary, is that we need to move beyond being apart from nature to being a part of nature. And it is the semantic nuance of being from nature to part of nature that is the most important. And I think in a capitalist society in particular, it encourages people towards the hustle mentality, the hustle lifestyle, in which productivity is the ultimate aim to be achieved from our lives. So it's all about making the most money, getting the best job, working the hardest, working the most amount of hours without taking into any real consideration, the balance of life and other things more important, I would argue, to us, like our relationship with nature, our relationship with each other, and that capitalist lifestyle, I guess, is predicated, especially now, upon the fact that, and this is my life motto, just because something was doesn't mean it has to be. And I've had that motto now for about a year, and I think it drives a lot of where I put value in my life. And I think a lot of the arguments surrounding the support of capitalism is that it has been beneficial for us as human society for quite a while now. And I'm not saying it's been beneficial for all of society, but it has been beneficial in that it has raised a lot of people out of poverty. It has provided opportunity for people. It has allowed us to live the lifestyle that we now consider normal. The problem being is that capitalism as a function of society is very much a backwards looking integration, in that we are constantly looking back to say, like, hey, look how good we've done up till now. Like, that has all been because of capitalism, without taking into consideration what is possibly coming up. And it goes back to that piece about humans not being great at planning long term, is that we find it hard to see that if we continue on with our capitalist driven society and business as usual, that things won't be better for us in the future. And what we consider normal now, and what we can see as being beneficial to us now, and we have the results to prove that, if we all just work harder, we all make more money, and therefore we can spend more money on things. That's not going to be the case in 50 years' time, because things will be out of our control, as it were, in that, the natural environment will collapse around us. Water scarcity, food scarcity will become a real issue. The climate will continue to change, so that weather patterns are you know, functions of our behavior will become more and more extreme. And the important point is that if we continue on with business as usual, we are making irreversible change. And it goes back to that emotional piece I mentioned earlier with, who cares if we're wrong? Like, what happens if we're right? Is that, the changes we're making now, if we figure out in 10, 20, 30 years' time that, oh, hey, like, maybe the scientists' predictions were actually right, like, we should probably, we should have made those changes back then, like, we should start making them now. That's not going to be good enough because the possible risks are so great that they outweigh any possible benefits from business as usual for humanity, as a collective. But then the third piece, I guess, of that capitalism argument, and my big pushback is that it all comes down to ego, and that's both as a collective and as an individual scale. The reason why capitalism has done so well as a way of living life is that it makes us feel good about ourselves individually, and when individuals feel good about ourselves collectively, we all feel good about ourselves. So it feels good to be important in an organization. It feels good to be productive, as it were. It feels good to be making money because we never take a step back to actually consider what we actually value in life. We just get told that these are the things that you should be striving for. And, when you achieve them, you get welcomed into that, very select group of people who can really reap the benefits of the society and the way we live our life. But for a lot of people, they don't get that chance in life. They never get that chance in life. And we need something, more socialist. We need some wider spread support systems for people. We need to reprioritize what we actually value in life for us as humanity to have a chance at actually maintaining our quality of life and improving the quality of lives of those around the world. And that all starts with collaboration. And that's the big piece I think that isn't discussed in any of these nature documentaries and any of these environmental documentaries, is that we're all fighting for things on our own. The fact that third world countries like Borneo are cutting down all of their rainforests for farmland is because as a small little nation, third world nation on their own, they're just trying to improve the standard of living to get to what the Western society is
well,
promoting.
people are just trying to survive, right?
Yeah, they're just trying to survive. And it's completely understandable that people are trying to survive. But if we take a step back and just look at humans as a species, like nations and nationalism is so dangerous to us, and it's all fueled by capitalism. The rich countries in the world that had the head start. So, I'm talking largely about the Western cultures who started with imperialism and colonialism. They've had a head start. They're the billionaires of today's society, and that, just because your grandfather was rich, you use the word before the
patrimonial capitalism.
Patrimonial capitalism. It perfectly encapsulates what I'm talking about here. Is that they've had the head start, and that we are all reaping the benefits now of the suffering incurred by these third world nations in particular, and the fact that countries like the US, countries like England, and most of the Western civilizations have been able to just burn a ridiculous amount of fossil fuels with no regard at all, not even disregard, with no regard at all for the environmental impact that will have for us, to get to a point in time where we now have an incredible standard of living. We need to be assisting those countries because as humans, as a species, we can't afford for them to follow in our footsteps and do the exact same thing. We can't afford for them to be burning fossil fuels. We can't afford for them to be cutting down rainforests. And, without the support and without collaboration from the united people on Earth, there's just no way that we can both maintain business as usual and capitalism and nationalism and individualism and everything else that we talk about on this podcast and all our previous episodes. So it all starts with taking ego out of the equation and reprioritize what we value as people and where we think our benefit can lie for everyone else around us.
I mean, that is a huge ask there, for like global cooperation at a time where we see nationalism popping up everywhere. It's worth noting, and I kind of wish that more people could see this, that nationalism, you know, identities of nations, flags, borders, etc. They're all just stories that don't exist. They're designed by people. A lot of these things are story. Capitalism's a story, and it's worth noting that it's only been around for 300 years or something. So why do we think that we have discovered everything that needs to be discovered? I feel like sometimes we feel like we're at the end of history and we've figured everything out, if you know what I mean. And you know, it's better than it always was, as you said before, but you know, not thinking really about the long-term future or where we go from here. Speaking of capitalism, and you know, one of the key ways of reducing, you know, poverty in the population was education, right? We both know that education is something that in capitalist states has been commodified. You know, you can't go to university without you know, paying ridiculous tuition fees in the US or the UK, to be honest. But especially as we go into the future and with technological disruption and things like that as well, who bears the cost of that? You know, how are people in developing nations supposed to, you know, pay for their education and things like that? This is why I think we need a different system to capitalism, because it's not going to help us to achieve where we need to be in order to achieve some of the solutions that Attenborough proposes in this documentary. You know, you talk about global cooperation, and I, you know, fully agree that that's something that we need to do, just in order to avoid conflict in the future. Because you know, there's probably going to be conflict over water at some point in the future, because that's, you know, fresh water is going to become a scarcity. Some people in the UK think there's a problem with immigration and migration at this moment in time. You know, wait until there are parts of the planet that are uninhabitable, either because they're underwater or because you know, they're like a desert and you can't live there. You know, humans physically can't exist there. Then you might have an immigration problem. And you know, what is always the case, predominantly the case, is the fact that, you know, people in Western society on an individual basis are responsible for more carbon emissions than, you know, people in poorer parts of the world. And so, and you know, global warming and breakdown and emissions, they don't take account of borders or anything like that. You know, when you know, use your car or whatever in the UK, it doesn't just affect the climate of the UK. It's a global, interconnected system, and this is why borders and things like that need to be put aside, really, you know, in order to deal with this problem, because they don't take account of national borders and sovereignty and all this crap, all these man-made, all these human fictions. And you know, in order to continue to have these fictions and stories, you know, which have brought us, you know, a lot of, you know, prosperity and discovery and culture and all these interesting things, all these things that are great that humans have created, you can't do that without the foundation, which is the planet. And so we need to be more in tune with it, more mindful of it. I said in a previous episode, you know, I love that quote, the proverb, a society grows great when people plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. That should kind of be the mantra that you kind of taught, to think beyond your generation. It's like, it's kind of like what I do when I look at my niece and nephew, because I don't want them to go through, you know, some of the horrible stuff that reels off. You know, we talked about the Amazon just, but you know, 2040s, you know, you lose all the permafrost and things like that, which, you know, releases more methane and all this kind of stuff. There's no ability to reflect the sun's heat energy from you know, the polar ice caps, because there aren't any polar ice caps anymore. Then you've got like coral reefs dying and fish stocks plummeting in, you know, estimated for the 2050s. And it's just it's stuff that we need to come together as, you know, a world population and figure out together. And capitalism and nationalism doesn't allow us to do that. Capitalism is all about competition. It's all about competition between nations, and when you know, certain nations suffer economically, they often like go to war with each other.
Yeah.
We need to create a more social, more democratic way of doing things. Like, so in the documentary, there's also the whalers, right? And they are killing whales. And obviously, Greenpeace are there, and other environmental movements are saying, "Please stop killing the whales," and all that kind of thing, which is great. I'm of the opinion that you can't really blame the working people for doing what they're doing, because what's their we don't know what their alternative is. That could be the only work that there is in that area for them. They're working. They're exploited themselves as workers. You know, they'll be getting those whales for, like, meat production or SeaWorld or something like that, where capitalists can sell the product at a profit. And I believe that if you have democratic institutions, like properly democratic institutions, democratic workplaces, democratic communities, then I think people will come together and go, "Why are we doing this? Oh, we can't do this anymore." You froze.
We've lost him. This isn't just a long pause for effect. We have lost Tom and Skype. Brilliant.
Hello.
He's back.
Back. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Internet. So where was I? Where did you hear me up to? This will be a test of whether you listen to what I say.
You said something like the most important thing, and then you just cut out.
Okay, so this is why I think one of the most important things is, I talked about global cooperation, right? Already. So one of the most important things is democracy in our institutions, proper democracy in our workplaces, democracy in our communities. Because if you get together on those bases and come together and look at all the facts that are going on, look at the kinds of things, science and things that are in this documentary, I don't think that the people would, vote to continue in the manner that we are. Especially not, working people who have families, who want the best for their children. Having that security in work and in life, being able to know that you are gonna be looked after, or if you come on hard times, or that you're going to be able to have a roof over your head, financial security. You're not going to be precarious, living paycheck to paycheck. You can then have more time to think about these things, to have the kinds of discussions that you and I are lucky enough to have, because it does take a lot of effort, doesn't it? To think about these things and have these types of conversations. So we need to change our value system, is basically what I'm saying. Because to continue in this extractive capitalist manner is not going to enable us to achieve the things that Attenborough suggests we need to do in this documentary.
Yeah, I think what you're really saying there is that when so much of the world's population is just fighting for money, and whether that's at the lower end of the spectrum where you're fighting for money to just continue to live, or if you're at the upper end of the spectrum where you're fighting for money just because that is how we have decided to set your value as a human, as an individual. It doesn't give you, it very rarely gives you the chance to make the hard decisions where you prioritize something more like a job that fits more aligned with your values than it does a job that just earns you the money you need to continue living or to get you to the best position in life. Yeah. And for you and I, we have to, we recognize, and it's probably something that we've downplayed in the past, but we recognize just how privileged we have been to be able to give up high-paying, well-respected, in quotation marks, well-respected jobs.
Yeah. Mine was not well respected.
A lawyer. Oh,
I didn't
yeah.
feel well
I
respected.
mean, but we have given up those jobs because our values didn't align with the work that we were doing. But we recognize that very few people in life ever get that chance. And,
Yeah.
Until we can completely change the structure of society and where we put our values and what we end up tracking and, what we consider as success for someone, then, global cooperation isn't going to happen, and people aren't going to be willing to help out their fellow man, and we aren't going to effectively improve the standard of living for people on the other side of the world, and we aren't going to be thinking long term about our future, and we're not going to be taking the required steps to get our population in control, for example. Money is the source of all evil. And despite the fact that so many movies and so many artists and poets and people around the world have been decrying that, not much has really changed significantly, but we are on the verge, hopefully, of a global movement away from the old school way of thinking. Now, not to
I
say that
think
the old
so.
school way of thinking is terrible. It was completely fine back in the day. But as I said, my life motto, just because something was doesn't mean it needs to be. And lots of things in life have changed. So, like tradition and how, just tradition and, that's the way it used to be and that's the way I grew up. That's no longer a good enough excuse. And
No.
it can't be a good enough excuse. We can't keep our heads in the sand and refuse to budge. Like, we need to be getting with the times, and we need to be changing the way that we think about things. We need to reprioritize our value systems. And, if you have the opportunity, if you have the privilege, then you need to be recognizing that and using that for the betterment of your fellow man, woman, child, future generation, environment, planet Earth as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke before about living with, sorry, we spoke before about living with, wildlife and stuff like that, and the privileges. And I'm a huge advocate of rewilding, especially in the UK. Like, I've talked about how I feel hiking in the UK, compared to how it was in Canada. And I do hope that the documentary, because you do see, when there's the video that he shows it, I think it's the Economic Forum at Davos, where the walruses are falling off the cliff and stuff like that. People are visibly affected by that kind of thing. And so we do have an empathy with animals in the natural world. And we need to be realizing that we're so powerful on this planet. And, to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. It's a cliche, but it is actually true.
Yeah.
You can either use that power to destroy the place, enslave the animal kingdom, basically, or you can be benevolent and be custodians of it and nurture it. Because we do need, one of the fundamental messages of the documentary is we need it. We need the biodiversity to maintain the temperatures that we've had for hundreds, thousands of years, millions of years. During the Holocene period, we've managed to, remarkably affect the stable temperatures that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years in the space of like 200 years. It's amazing. And when you think about how long humans have been around, humans used to exist in, small, communities where, decision making and responsibilities would be shared. He speaks in the documentary about the people of Papua New Guinea who eat meat rarely, who have a mainly plant-based diet because they know it regenerates itself. That's the kind of impact that we need to have on a global scale now. And that does require, transitioning our diet. It requires transitioning our value systems, as I've said. And and you've talked a bit about it with ego and things like that. I think we need to realise that, we're not the most important thing in the world, and that we have actually a huge responsibility to be stewards and custodians of the place. Because, as I say, without it, we can't have any of this, these magnificent stories that we've made without the actual foundation that exists in objective reality. It's just getting that. It's just getting that right, I think, in the mind.
Yeah, one of the biggest criticisms of the environmental movement, I saw put the best actually in a YouTube comment randomly on one of David Attenborough's older documentaries, and basically to sum up the pushback against the environmental movement is this perfectly encapsulated phrase, and it's capitalism is humanist and environmentalism is non-humanist. And now there's so many things wrong with that, but just to break it down real quick, firstly, why should humans value their own success, productivity? What's the word I'm looking for here?
But it's also the fact that I just say, like, capitalism is a relationship of it's a power differential relationship, so it doesn't fully respect the humanist experience, because it's a position where you have someone at the top telling someone at the bottom what to do. So I kind of think that goes against the argument.
I'm thinking even more simply than this. Prosperity is a word I was looking for. Like, firstly, why should human prosperity be the most important thing in the world? Like, we are humans, but we only got to this point by being the most intelligent creatures. But surely we can see that using our intelligence, we should see that human prosperity isn't the only and most important thing for us. And so that's my first pushback against that criticism, I guess. And secondly, it's such a short-sighted view. Like, yes, capitalism was humanist in that it was allowing us to flourish as a species, but in the longer term, based upon all of the research that scientists have been able to uncover and their recommendations and conclusions, we can see that continued capitalism isn't going to be the best for us in the future, and therefore it can't possibly be humanist if we do still value human prosperity as being the most important thing. Humans will be also suffering from the consequences of our continued and business as usual behaviors. And so it's hard to argue that environmental is non-humanist when we're taking a longer viewpoint look at the world in which we will be living in. And while yes, on a very shallow surface level, the fact that we're arguing for a smaller population means that we aren't putting value on humans that don't even exist. Like, that in itself is a flawed argument. Like, why is this criticism putting value on humans that don't exist in the future rather than putting value on the humans that will exist in the future? And I hope that's clear, but just to say that just because we're arguing for population control in whatever way that ends up being implemented, the fact that we need to get a handle on our population is well established as being something that's very important for us. That isn't an anti-humanist stance. That is trying to say, like, hey, we aren't sustainable as a species. We need to get a handle on things, and to ensure that less suffering happens in the future, we need to be making these changes now.
Yeah, but what's worth noting there is that the methods of getting out of that situation of controlling population in some regard are education and lifting people out of poverty. So that it's actually about making life better, and then the population the inference is that the population takes care of itself once you have reduced poverty and also education, and especially girls staying in education.
Support.
Yeah. So the way to do that is to lift people out of poverty, and that can only be a good thing, can't it? So I wouldn't buy that argument. And also, capitalism, as I say, is about power differentials. It's about extracting wealth from people. It's about not paying people what they're worth, because if you think about it, an employer is only going to pay you $20 an hour if in that hour you produce more than $20 an hour. So you don't even get what you produce, basically. How is that? How does that have any, consideration for, a humanist point of view? Other things are in if you just look at America, they don't have even the richest country in the world. They don't have universal healthcare. There's homeless people in the US and in the UK. It doesn't make any sense, these arguments, to me. And add to that the fact that it's just destroying the environment. That whole thing about environment and humanist or whatever doesn't make sense, because if you take out the environment, you can't have the other one.
Exactly.
You need, as we've said on this, you need the basis, the foundation, to be able to live these human stories and experiences. That's putting the egg before the chicken, or no, the chicken before the egg, or whatever it is, the car before the horse. To say that. There's a lot there. I would recommend that people watch the documentary. It's very good.
Yeah.
It's beautifully shot. David Attenborough is a legend. I think we can all agree on that. An international.
Apparently we can't. There's lots
treasure.
of criticisms about David Attenborough being bought out by the media, and he's capitulated to the environmental movement and all of this stuff. But I recognize that the last 15 minutes, half an hour, hour and a half podcast. We're playing a fine line between being too preachy here, as we mentioned earlier. So we don't always want to feel like we're releasing podcast episodes that are too preachy for some people. We want to feel inclusive for everyone, and I think a big part of how we present this podcast is that we take these big ticket issues that are facing the world, and we're not trying to say that the answers are simple. We recognize that they are very complicated issues, and we can't just the quick fix is these 5 things and then we're done and dusted. But it all starts with small individual changes, and we wanted this podcast to be something that how should individuals react to these big issues? How should we educate ourselves on them? How should we break out of our own echo chamber is the motto of this podcast. But I think where we want to take this further into the future, now that we've had a bit of a hiatus over summer, is that we want to get better at presenting individuals with certain actions that they could do to affect change within their own lives, so that small individual actions can result in a collective change across society. It's you and I can't just get rid of capitalism on our own, right? Like we need individuals to force change upon our business leaders and our political leaders around the world. And so to start this off, I think Tom and I want to put together a sort of like a library of resources as to how it sounds egotistical to say how we think people should be living their lives, or how we recommend where we get some of our information from. What are we watching? What information are we consuming? Even something simple like adopting more of a vegan lifestyle, for example. Like Tom mentioned it very briefly much earlier, but we want to put together a list of websites you can go to if you're willing to try out some vegan recipes, because for a lot of people, change is really, really hard. It's just part of our psychology. Like, we don't want to change, and the bigger the barrier to change, the less likely we are to do it. And so I think our job, as people with some level of influence, even if it is just a very, very small audience listening to this podcast or watching our YouTube videos, small influence is better than no influence, and small changes are better than no changes. So, we want to show you that a lot of these things aren't as difficult as they seem on the surface level. We want to break down that barrier to make change easier for you. And any way that we can do that, any recommendations you have, we want to hear about it. So if there's any documentaries that you think we should be watching, if there's any books you think we should be reading, if there's websites you think people should be going to and visiting on the regular, if there's...
If you think we've got it wrong,
You think we've
And
got
you know,
completely
you
wrong?
want to, get in touch. Honestly, this is one of the reasons why we started this, was to create a dialogue. It's not all about us just saying this is, what it should be,
Yeah.
etc. It's going, this is what we think. Having the time to sit down, to read these things, to put in the effort to make these, to prepare for these kinds of interactions that we have, like together and like with the guests that we have on. We're just saying that this is what we think the pictures look like, the big picture looks like at this moment in time. This is what we do. This is why we do it. You can, just as easy come along and go, I do it this way because and it, as long as there's that respectful debate, and a coming together, with a view to hearing each other out and learning from each other and going, oh yeah, I didn't see it like that, or all that kind of thing. Just remember, it's a two-way street. This whole podcast, it's not us just preaching, the way that you are living your life is wrong or whatever. It's nothing like that. It's just what we see, the way that we interpret it, analyze it, scrutinize things, and just what pops out the other end, really.
Yeah, help us help you is what we're trying to say. We know what our voices sound like, and while Tom sounds amazing, I know I don't. So I would much rather have guests on that have their own ways of living life, so that I can speak less and we can hear you speak more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for the support, mate.
Yeah.
But if you haven't already, please do actually watch this documentary. It is wonderfully filmed, as Tom said, and it has brought up a lot of questions for us. It's brought up a lot of topics. It's brought up a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of opinions. And these are our opinions. We aren't saying they're right or wrong. We're just trying to explain. We're trying to explain the way we live our lives, so that hopefully we can convince some of you to live more like us. But that's not saying that we aren't willing to change the way we live our life. If you have a more reasonable or justified way of living your own life, so hopefully we're making you feel inclusive. Hopefully we are welcoming you into our world. This is something we care deeply about. Obviously, we're very passionate about it, which is why we continue to release these podcasts every week. And if you are interested in following along our discourse on anything big, breaking the echo chamber of your social media and trying to introduce you to some of the issues facing the world, the complex things that are stopping us from living our best lives and securing the future of humanity, then please do like us at Tom Stew and You on Facebook and Instagram. Send us an email, hi@tomstewandyu, if you have any questions, queries, comments, concerns, recommendations for future podcast episodes, or recommendations for our library of resources, how to live your best life.
Yeah. Look forward to receiving them. Always love hearing from people.
Absolutely.
Always love learning from people. Everyone's got a story worth listening to, worth telling. So please do get in touch. We love to hear from you. Watch the documentary with a critical eye. Enjoy it. Enjoy the cinematography and the videography of it, because some of it is stunning. And just regard David Attenborough while we have him here still.
Living legend.
Living legend, yeah.
All right, we'll have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next week on the Tom Stew and You podcast. Thanks very much.
Yeah, until next time, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.